You know the feeling. You grab a coffee, pick up a sandwich, maybe even use the self-checkout. And then it happens. That screen swivels around and suddenly you're staring at a choice. 18%, 20%, 25%, or that big, awkward no-tip button. It's just a simple purchase, but man, that moment feels loaded. And it's happening pretty much everywhere now.
Yeah, if that sounds a little too familiar, you're definitely not alone. There are even names for this feeling now. People are calling it Tipflation or talking about guilt tipping, where a simple transaction suddenly comes with this heavy dose of social pressure.
So the frustration is real, but it's also a clue that there are bigger things going on here. Things about our economy, about how people get paid, and a tech that's connecting it all. How did we get here? How did a simple thank you turn into this moment of public anxiety? Well, that's exactly what we're going to break down. To get you from confusion to clarity, here's our plan. First, we're going to dig into the psychology of why this all feels so different now. Then we'll pull back the curtain on the systems that are driving this whole thing. We'll follow the money to see who's winning and who's losing. And finally, we'll look at what we can actually do about it.
All right, let's start with part one. Why does tipping just feel so weird these days? The answer really comes down to a fundamental change in the entire experience. It's gone from this passive thing in the background to a very active, in-your-face decision.
Just think about it this way. The old-school glass tip jar on the counter, it was pretty easy to ignore, right? It was passive. But the tablet that swivels around, it forces you to make a choice, right then and there, while the person who just helped you is watching. Tapping no tip feels totally different from just not dropping $1 in a jar. That right there is the new social pressure at work. But here's a fascinating twist. You'd think with all this added pressure, we'd be tipping way more. But the actual data from payment processors like Toast and Square shows that we're not. Our tipping habits in restaurants have stayed pretty much the same. In some cases, the average tip has even gone down a little bit. So the feeling of being asked has changed a lot more than the amount of money we're actually giving.
So, if our behavior hasn't really changed, then what has? To understand that, we have to look past the payment screen itself and at the hidden systems, the economic and technological forces that built this whole new culture.
And this whole shift didn't just happen randomly. It's really the result of three specific things all crashing into each other. First, the really complicated, often misunderstood ways service workers are paid in the first place. Second, the new payment technology itself. And third, the big cultural shifts that came out of the pandemic, when we all, really wanted to support essential workers. Let's simplify one of the most confusing parts of this entire debate. It's called the tip credit system. Basically, in a lot of states, the law allows a business to pay a worker way less than the regular minimum wage. Why? Because the law just assumes that your tips will make up the difference.
And just how low can that pay be? The federal subminimum wage, which is still the law in some states, is just $2.13 an hour. So what this system does, effectively, is shift a huge chunk of an employee's paycheck from the business owner directly to you, the customer, through that little prompt on the screen.
This creates a business strategy you might have heard of called price partitioning. Here's a good analogy. It's the Ryanair model for dining. You see a super cheap flight, but then you get hit with fees for your bag, your seat, for printing your ticket. Restaurants do the same thing. Your brain sees a $20 burger and thinks, hey, good deal, even though you almost always end up paying $24 after the expected tip. We get anchored to that low base price, not the real final cost.
And this brings us to a really important knowledge gap. It's easy to assume that when businesses save money on wages, it just goes straight into the owner's pocket. But a lot of the time, that savings is actually passed on to all of us in the form of lower menu prices. So in a way, customers who tip well are kind of subsidizing a cheaper meal for those who don't.
Okay, so with all these different pieces in motion, who's actually winning in this system? And who's getting left behind? Let's follow the money and see what's really going on. The truth is, the results are all over the place. A server in a busy, high-end restaurant, they can make way more with tips than they ever could with a flat wage. But for tons of other workers, their income is totally unpredictable. Meanwhile, we, the customers, are stuck dealing with anxiety at the checkout, and a lot of the time, the kitchen staff, the cooks, the dishwashers, they're legally left out of the tip pool altogether. And to make it all even more confusing, you've got this minefield of fees on a modern receipt. You might see a service charge, a wellness fee, and then a line for a tip. Are they the same thing? No, and it's a huge source of frustration for a very good reason. Okay, here's the absolute most critical thing to understand.
A tip is voluntary, and by law, that money belongs to the employees. A service charge, on the other hand, is mandatory, and it legally belongs to the business. The owner can use that money for anything they want, rent, profits, whatever, unless it's explicitly spelled out on the menu. A service charge is not a tip.
And this just shows how much the whole idea of tipping can be twisted. Get this, the financial app Dave started asking users for a tip when they took out a paycheck advance. But that money didn't go to customer service workers, no, it went straight to the multi-billion-dollar corporation. The FTC had to step in after the company had already collected nearly $150 million this way.
Okay, so the system is complicated, it's confusing, and sometimes it's really misleading. That brings us to the biggest question of all. What can we actually do about it? Let's take a look at some of the proposed solutions.
There are really 4 main ideas being debated. The first is service-included pricing. Basically, menu prices are higher, but there's no tipping. That gives staff a stable paycheck, but it can create some serious sticker shock for customers. Second, get rid of the sub-minimum wage entirely, so tips become a true bonus on top of a full wage. Third, some people propose making tips tax-free to boost how much workers take home. And fourth, using mandatory service fees, but with really clear, transparent rules about where that money actually goes.
So, while the big debates keep going, here's a practical guide for right now. For a regular sit-down restaurant, 18 to 20% is still the standard. For counter service, like at a coffee shop, it's pretty much optional, but $1 or $2 is common if you think the service was good. For delivery or rideshare, factor in the effort, the distance, the weather, and probably the most important rule of all, always check your bill for automatic gratuity or other service charges before you add a tip. And all of this leaves us with the one central question at the heart of this entire debate. The current system can lead to a lot of confusion and inequality, for sure, but it's also deeply woven into our economy. So, as we move forward, is the goal to make tipping clearer and fairer and more transparent? Or is it time to imagine a future where we just don't tip at all? That's the real conversation that's happening every single time that screen swivels your way.